Hi everybody, welcome back. If you haven't had a chance, I have a 5 video plus an intro, so 6-part video series that kicks off my introduction to the Wicked Years series of 4 books by Gregory Maguire, starting with Wicked, the first book. Everybody's familiar with it. So it's not necessarily a breakdown of a story, although I do go over that in the introduction. But it is a breakdown of the different themes and plot points and stories and the purposes, you know, the subtext of what the book is about. So after Wicked, as promised, I was going to read Son of a Witch again. This would be probably, I think, maybe my second or third time reading it through. This time I did audiobook. But it follows immediately after the story of Wicked, and it follows the son of the witch. So if you remember in Wicked, she has a boy that follows her to Kyamako from the Monterey. His name is Lear. And there's a giant question mark about whether or not Elphaba is his mother and Fiyero is his father. So where Son of a Witch takes up is immediately following. I'm just going to kind of brush over the story, broad strokes, like at least the beginning. The middle and the end don't really matter because the story is important, but I kind of get into the point of each section when they're telling stories. I really would like for you to read the book. I don't want to tell you everything. If you really want a breakdown or a synopsis, chapter by chapter, I'm sure you can find it on the internet. I want to go into, you know, the thematic points of the book. But it does pick up, he's a child. Elphaba has just died. Dorothy Gale and her crew are going back to the Emerald City to prove to the wizard with the broom that the witch is dead. And Lear says he's going with them, and they're like, well, you weren't really invited. The wizard, he's like, well, if you're taking the broom, I'm going with the broom, and I will carry it until you get there. So they get to the wizard. He is not invited in, so they kind of part ways, and he never sees Dorothy and everybody again, except for the Scarecrow. And so he's a child. He's left in the Emerald City to kind of fend for himself. And he's off. He sees some other kids and is kind of playing with them. He goes to church. He's kind of like getting an idea for like what life is like outside of Kyamako, because he's a child. He's never known anything but Elphaba, Kyamako, maybe a little bit of the Monterey and the travel through Cumbricious Pass and things like that when he was a child. But this is his first real foray into the world and an introduction to people and society. We'll talk about the importance of that because that was kind of Gregory Maguire's point that he was saying was really kind of something that it's a thematic element of the book about him introducing himself into society in order to accomplish stuff. As a child, he has to learn to survive, and so he kind of finds some street kids. He's kind of like going along with them and doing the same stuff to survive. He finds a place where they said he can get free stale bread because they're feeding the birds, you know, things like that. And then the Scarecrow eventually finds him and offers to help get him out of the city with the broom. So he has acquired the broom, he gives it to Lear, and he tries to help him get out of the city. But on his way out of the city, they pass a place called South Stair. And South Stair is, according to the Scarecrow, a prison, a secret prison, like an underground, like just a bad place. It's Guantanamo Bay, or Abu Ghraib, specifically. And I'll talk about that in a second. The Scarecrow is really trying to get him out of town because he's like, it's going to get dangerous. You don't want to be here. You don't want to experience what's going to happen. I assure you. And then I think they're in a boat. They're going down some canal in the dark at night. And the Scarecrow's really trying to get him out of town. He's explaining like the new politics that there's currently there's a Scarecrow emperor in place, straw man government. Hello. And he is basically a straw man representative or head or like figure that represents basically the guild interests, the bank interests. He's a fake head of state. He even goes on to say any Scarecrow, it doesn't matter which. So it's not the Scarecrow, it's a Scarecrow, and that's coming out of the Scarecrow's mouth. He's saying it's not me, it's just any, it doesn't matter. It's a Scarecrow, it's a straw man. Important because, you know, if you're familiar with politics, that's a pretty key statement when it comes to the efficacy of how a government is run. Anyhow, they're escaping. He's talking to him about what's going on, what the purpose, what the wizard's going to do now that he's, Elphaba's dead. And he ends up leaving with Dorothy, as we know from the film. And Gregory Maguire sticks with that. But before he abdicates the throne, he sets up that government with the straw man in place. Boom, boom, boom. So there's the politics. As they're escaping, they pass under a balcony and there's a party going on. It's the house of Lord Chuffrey, which, if you're familiar, that means Lady Glinda of the Arduinas. So Glinda she has kind of a passive interaction in this book. She does directly influence some stuff later on. But for the most part, there's a satisfaction in her plot throughout the book here, because Lear takes the advice of the Scarecrow, into consideration, but ultimately he doesn't leave the Emerald City, and he actually goes to Galinda during the day to one of the servant doors, and he says, tell her that I have the witch's broom. And they all kind of laugh him off, and he goes away. But then somebody finds him and says, "Oh, good, you're still here." She heard the rumors, downstairs with the staff, and she wants to see you, and she wants to see you now. You're coming. You need to get a bath because you need to be presentable, Lady Glinda. And she, has some kind of it's a passing conversation. She's still very oblivious and aloof. Her character in the book is really kind of two-dimensional, not as 3D, not as well developed and fleshed out as Glinda from the Broadway musical. She's more just kind of actually kind of depressing and sad and loathsome. So ultimately Glinda says, gives them some information, says, you need to be dressed, you need to present yourself as a certain way, but I think I can get you into that prison. Because remember, he's looking for Nor, his half-sister, allegedly, with Fiyero and Sarima's daughter. And so, of course, let's face it, the book, it's in the title, Son of a Witch, so obviously there can only be one dad. So his mission is to find Nor. And Glinda says, okay, I'll help you. We got to get you dressed. You got to get cleaned up. You got to fit in because you look weird. And you got to hide the broom because it's kind of girly. So she helps him. She puts him in touch with somebody that is going to get him to South Stair, the prison. And think of it like a state prison, but it's separate because they want plausible deniability. They want to be able to say, oh, we don't know what's going on in there. We have nothing to do with that. That's their own thing. And that's a key element of the book too. And we'll talk about that in a second. He meets Shell. So Shell, if you recall, is Nessarose and Elphaba's youngest brother, shelter god. He is the son of Melina and Frexbar. And so he has kind of become a spy. You learn that at the end of Wicked, where they say, he's off doing his cloak and dagger stuff up in the Emerald City. And ultimately he is kind of they call him later the first spear of Oz, or the first spear of the Emerald City, or something like that. Of the unnamed god, I think, actually. But so he has clandestine duties, and he's going into South Stair, and that's how Commander Cherrystone, who Lady Galinda introduces Lear to, she puts him in the care of Cherrystone, who happens to be the same guy that kidnapped Sarima and the sisters and the kids, his half brothers and sisters, including Nor. But Cherrystone has no, he vaguely is oh, I think I understand who you are. Maybe, all that old business back then, that's, water under the bridge. And so Lear's learning to kind of let things go because it's not going to make a difference if he fights for it or not, which is actually in contradiction to his mother and her stand up for everything you believe in attitude. And so it's kind of showing that separation, that he's not like his mother, but then, ultimately he's got to build his own personality, his own identity, while also adopting that he is the inheritor of the legacy of the witch. So anyway, Commander Cherrystone sets him up, introduces him to Shell, who's going into South Stair, and then they part ways. He goes with Shell downstairs into this prison, and it's another world. And it kind of gave me this mental impression of, I think of The Silver Chair, Prince Caspian, Chronicles of Narnia, where they go down into the underground prisons and I can't remember. I haven't read that one for a very long time. But anyhow, he gets down into this prison and he starts his life on a path of, one step to the other. Eventually comes to the understanding that that Shell is nothing but a hedonist. He's literally drugging girls and raping them in their prison cells. And he's like, all right, I gotta go. I have a mission and I'm not gonna sit here and, bear witness to your atrocities. You're secretly my uncle, but I'm not gonna tell you that because I want nothing to do with you. You're really weird, you're gross, it's bad, you're a bad influence. And I see why they don't like you. So he parts ways with Shell. And then from there, I want you to read the book. It literally just picks up and it time jumps a little bit, 10 years here, 10 years there, back and forth, but you get the gist. You do eventually kind of find your bearings. But from there, he learns that Noor is no longer there and she has escaped. She has found her way out of South Stair, and to him, his goal is achieved. So he makes his way to the surface using the broom and decides he's got a life to start and does not know where to begin. And that's where he meets Trism. Little Freudian slip there. Trism is a military guy, plays a huge role in the book. I would say primary supporting character. And he introduces him to the military and basically convinces Lear to sign up for the military. And he does. And then, there's a huge part of the plot where he's in the military, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the story goes on. So I want to step away from the plot of the book because I'm not going to break it down. That would be too long and really unnecessary, especially if you're going to read the book. It's an amazing, incredibly rich story. It definitely, it achieves the legacy of Wicked. The version of Wicked that Gregory Maguire wrote in the original novel, not the play. Very different. So from there, I want to take a step into Gregory Maguire's shoes and talk about why he wrote the book, the sequel. He kind of joked about it online. He said that, if I ever did, obviously I would call it Son of a Witch because it was a play on words, and, all the online forums were like, oh! They really freak out. But he didn't have any intention of writing it. And obviously the commercial success of the first book and the Broadway musical, he was kind of pressured into and inspired to write the second book. And then he even thought he was going to stop there. And we know that there's, 2 more books in the series plus 3-book spin-off series. But what he wanted to say is he wanted to describe the difference between Wicked and Son of a Witch. And he said, Son of a Witch is about the power that one person does or doesn't have in a situation, a social situation, a political situation, and that is the main point of the book, about realizing what your power actually is. There's the very obvious, does he have the same power, meaning magically, as Elphaba did? But also the power that we have as individuals to influence society, to influence our social circles, to influence, the teachers in schools, that we have to trust their authority or question their authority. Obviously he gets into the military, as I just said, and the military is notoriously order driven. Your opinion doesn't exist. You have no identity outside of following orders. And so that's obviously very opposite of Elphaba, who's very anti-establishment, and she makes her own rules and does not listen to anybody. So he wanted to make a book that complemented but also contrasted Wicked, the original novel. And he said, if Wicked is the story of a woman finding, this is a quote, if Wicked is the story of a woman finding her individual voice against an oppressive authority, then Son of a Witch is the tale of a man who realizes that in order to make an impact, he has to belong to society. He cannot be a hermit. That was Gregory Maguire's quote in an interview. And so that's kind of the point, is in order to realize you have power, you have to be a part of the machine that you want to influence. You can't sit outside and just will it to be without getting your hands dirty or participate. You got to participate in the story if you want to have a role. The ultimate plot of the book is, at least on a general level, the search for Noor. Obviously, like I said, he does discover that she got out. And periodically throughout the book, you find that, he does kind of go back to that question of, where is Noor? Wonder what she's doing now. Maybe she's back at Kyamoko. He does go back to Kyamoko a couple times. And he always fantasizes that he's going to walk in and she's making pies. And everything will be glorious. It doesn't actually end up that way. He doesn't actually come face to face or even speak with Noor ever in the book. But they do kind of tidy that up. And then one of the subplots of the book is how an individual might not necessarily have the power to just walk up to a prison, South Stair, and have the power to demand justice and fairness out of the people running that organization. And that the reason one individual doesn't have that power is because of the specter of the power of the institution itself. One person can't influence that because of the myth that exists around a prison. And the myth of this prison, it becomes legend because to one side of the people looking at it, it's a symbol of protection and, authority and, law enforcement. It's where they put the bad guys so that we can live our lives safely. But then to the other people, it's a symbol of oppression that literally gives a fear of losing control if you get caught for not sticking with the status quo. And so this power that you have, and they address that in Wicked too, you have no power over hearsay, over the mythos of something. Once something has grown horns, so to speak, it is what it is, and it's done. So you have to accept what it is and see where you fit into it. You might be able to influence it, but you're never going to change that perceived reality, the power of this prison. So what do? Let's go underground. Let's figure out how to undermine it. And that's one of the, I would say, the subplot of the book, in a general sense, because it's almost like a compilation of stories of Lear's life, because he goes in phases. It jumps 10 years, it jumps 20 years, and just like how Elphaba goes from shiz to being a mercenary in the city to being an isolate in Kyamako to being this activist witch counter government. Lear's story is the same, where it jumps into his different eras. So each section of the book has a relative tie to each other, but mostly they're just different eras telling the same story as he grows and learns about himself. So with the concept of what I was just talking about with the prison having power, I want to talk about what Gregory Maguire said was the main inspiration for Son of a Witch in the beginning. He said that it was about the Abu Ghraib prison incident. And if anybody recalls, you can Google it. This is it's a prison in Iraq, I think. And the Bush administration said that they had nothing to do with it. Sound familiar? The wizard and the strawman government. Oh, we don't want anything to do with, South Stair. So Abu Ghraib was a military installation outside of the United States in Iraq that had prisoners of the War on Terror, and American soldiers, Army specifically, were torturing, killing. They were, desecrating corpses of prisoners. And it was just it was an awful, awful story. I'm not going to get into the details of it, but you can Google it if you want. But these atrocities, these horrors, were, I was quoting Elphaba's first words, horrors. She was repeating Turtle Heart, why he left Quadling Country. But anyway, these horrors that happened at Abu Ghraib inspired Gregory Maguire to write this, and that's why a huge, chunk at the beginning of Lear's life is him experiencing this prison situation. Noor is a prisoner, and he needs to get her out. It also talks about the unchecked humanitarian violations that happen There's no mechanism in place to control it, to keep people safe, or to make sure that people's rights are not violated. They're kind of out of sight, out of mind. And that's back to what I was saying. The power of that prison is that the prison becomes a boogeyman. It's something to be feared, and you can't stop it. It's a train. It's a runaway train. So moving on, he says also that wicked is a tragedy because the witch dies. And what that means, the main tragedy of it, is that her life was cut short. So any story that would or might have been, had she lived longer, is lost. So the tragedy is the unknown life that she never got to live. And so with that, it means that there are a lot of unfinished stories. There's a lot of unresolved things about her universe that we don't know. And the tragedy of it is that we may never know. And so Son of a Witch comes in and kind of makes an effort to satisfy the resolution of those things that were still outstanding. And in a way, that's Lear's responsibility, is to meet to gain closure for his mother on her behalf as the inheritor of her legacy. And legacy is, I think, a really good word to describe kind of the overlying story arc of Lear himself. So because her life ended prematurely, there are a lot of loose ends and a lot of unrealized victories that she never got to achieve or witness. You know, so maybe some things did happen, but she never got to see it. And that's part of the thing, is because she was wicked, there was a purpose behind what she did, but she never got to see the outcome. And Lear gets to witness that and kind of experience that pride in knowing that what she sacrificed herself for was not wasted. She didn't die in vain. For the readers, we have that dramatic irony of knowing what happened, knowing that he is actually her son, even though he questions it, and being able to recognize, like, oh my gosh, how cool is that? He gets to see the fruit of his mother's labors. And it helps him start to understand more and more. As he feels similarly to how she does, he begins to understand why she was the way she was. There's even like a memory that he has while he's sick or while he's recovering, or you know, there's some magical memory that he gets, but he's kind of almost having like a third party view outside, but he sees a woman in black with a green foot rocking a cradle. And that's us indirectly being told that while we may not have confirmation directly that she's his mother, she rocked the cradle. That says a lot. And so you get a sense for where the outcome might have leaned had she lived. And then what his story does is it gives us enough information to kind of get an idea, like, because he doesn't tie up all of the loose ends. We don't know where Nora is. We don't know what happened in a lot of situations, but we get an idea of where it's going, or where, you know, we're left to interpret at our will. It's open-ended enough that we can use our imagination to, you know, kind of speculate on theories that we like. Now I want to go into the themes. The themes is like a huge part of it. So there's a lot of different ones. I'm not going to get too in depth. I'm going to kind of leave it at a general level because people are smart enough to comprehend. Illuminating it, outlining, oh, this one, and then this one, and then this. I think that'll be enough. And then I'll maybe give some examples. But like I was starting to say, is that Lear gets to bear witness to history. That dramatic irony, that I love that phrase. The dramatic irony means the audience knows, but the people participating in the story may not. So the drama is that we're watching them struggle, but we know. That's the irony. So the dramatic irony of knowing the truth, but not having the strength to stop something from happening, or to speak up, or to identify. You see it a lot. When he meets Shell, he actually wants to say, hey, I might be Elphaba's son, so you might be my uncle. But he doesn't. And maybe that's because he doesn't have the courage, or he doesn't have the strength, or he doesn't have the confidence that it might be true. And so he, throughout the book, gains insight into the mechanisms that operate behind the scenes that create the perception that society sees. And so rather than trying to directly influence it, he wants to know how it works so he can start to kind of interact with it and maybe manipulate it a little bit. And then a huge part of the book too is about claiming your voice. You know, Elphaba had her voice from the very beginning and she never questioned it. She had exactly known what she wanted when she decided, and she went for it, and she didn't let anybody ever make her doubt herself much. Lear, on the other hand, had 0%, confidence in what he was going to do. And so he had to learn to kind of crawl out from under the burden of not knowing and just decide that he was going to create his own identity outside of what he thought might be or could be or should be in relation to how he was related to Elphaba. And so claiming his voice and cultivating the courage that he needs to accept it and live that life. Find the truth. He may know the truth, but he's got to find the courage to live it. Another part of the book, too, it explores a little bit more. Elphaba was kind of, I want to say asexual, because we know, obviously, that she, had intimacy with Fiyero. But there was a more of an emphasis in Son of a Witch, and not necessarily around intimacy itself, because that was a huge part, but about different concepts within intimacy, like the idea of sexuality. In the book, sexuality doesn't care about gender. Lear has, let's say, physical inclinations toward both Candle and to Trism. And he, in one way or another, has physical intimacy with both of them. But the one with Candle, he wanted it, but she took it without consent while he was passed out. And she explained that, it was to help bring him back from whatever, drifting off darkness he was when he, was in a coma. And her playing her instrument, the Domingan, and she, they don't directly say it, but later Mother Yakko kind of she's like, she learned the magic of a woman to suck the vile juices out of a man. She raped him while he was in a coma. Okay, and then she got pregnant. And so there's this story of consent and his frustration with her, but also forgiveness and accepting the responsibility of the child that has come of this non-consensual union. And then we talk about his relationship with Trism. And with Trism, it was more of this common history, shared trauma. He fell in love accidentally with Trism. And then they had a wonderfully passionate sexual interaction. And then, he wants to have a future with both of them for various different reasons. And kind of sets it up so that he can, and they, maybe a throuple, it doesn't work out. And, in the end, he's left with neither of them holding a baby. So we've got the story of, or the theme of love, different kinds of love, the love that Elphaba gave him, the love that he needs to give to this child that was conceived without his permission, the love that he has for Candle despite what she did, because he, had a fondness for her. And for Trism, he literally at the end of the book wants to spend the rest of his life with Trism, and Trism helps him find the word love. He's like, is this what that is? What is this love? Why am I feeling the way I feel? It's really weird. And it's foreign to him because most of the time he feels like he doesn't deserve it. I'm going to go ahead and leave it right there. I'm going to make a second film video because I'm at 30 minutes. So I'm going to pick up with that. We're talking about intimacy now. We'll move into, I'll kind of refresh on intimacy at the beginning of the next one and then finish out the film. So please stay tuned for the next one. I'm going to put them both out at the same time. So thank you very much, and I'll see you in a minute.